We're next going to look at naming of ring. We're next going to look at naming of organic molecules that have rings in them. We're going to focus on molecules that have one ring, which we call cyclic or monocyclic molecules, and molecules that have two rings that are connected together, which we call bicyclic molecules. So we're going to start with monocyclic molecules. In monocyclic molecules, the parent chain can be a ring of atoms. What we have to do is we have to consider separately the ring of atoms and then the length of any chains attached. If the number of atoms in the ring is larger than the number of atoms in any of the chains, then the parent will be the ring. In contrast, if one of the chains is longer, has more carbons or more atoms in it than the ring, then the ring will be a substituent. Again, we also have to consider the priority rules for functional group, double bond, and triple bond. And if we have no functional group or unsaturation, then we select the ring or chain that has the most atoms. When the ring has fewer carbons than the attached chain, we use the attached chain as the parent, and we name the ring as a cyclo, which means ring, alkyl substituent group of the same number. When the parent chain is a ring, what we're going to do is count up the number of carbons in the ring and determine the parent name, and then we're going to start numbering on the carbon of the ring that has a functional group or a double bond or a triple bond from highest to lowest priority. If there are none of these, we will talk later about how we handle numbering. When there's only one substituent in a ring, the carbon where that substituent is attached will always be carbon 1. Now, be careful that carbon 1 will not necessarily be at what we could call the 12 o'clock position, in analogy to where 12 o'clock is on a clock face. It can be anywhere, depending on how the molecule was drawn. So we see in this particular example that we have a methyl group attached here. So we would call that carbon 1, and then we could actually number this in either direction, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So our parent is cyclo, because it's a ring, hexa, because it has 6 carbons. We drop the A, we add ANE ending because there's no double bonds or functional groups, there's no unsaturations. And then we have a methyl substituent at 1. So we could write 1-methyl. However, the number 1 is optional when there is only one substituent and no other functional groups, because the rules say we automatically have to choose the carbon that has the one substituent attached as carbon 1. So therefore, it is perfectly correct to name this methyl cyclohexane. It should not be considered incorrect, however, to include the number for consistency's sake. In a molecule which has no main functional group and no unsaturations, so basically an alkane, when there are exactly 2 substituents, what we do is we give the substituent with the lower alphabetical name the lower number. Now, it's very important to emphasize that this is only in a situation where we have a ring as our parent and we have 2 substituents exactly. If we have 1 substituent, there's a different rule. If we have 3 substituents or more, there's a different rule. But in the case where we have exactly 2 substituents, we can have several different potential numbering systems, which I've indicated here in red, starting on the left-hand carbon with the substituent 1, 2, 3. Here in green, 1, 2, 3 in the opposite direction. And even we could go around in a different direction around the ring, 1, 2, 3, 4. So over here, I've made a list of where the locants would be for each of these numbering systems. So for example, in the red, we would have a substituent at 1 and at 3. In the green, we would have a substituent at 1 and at 3, although they would be the opposite substituents. And in the blue, they would be at 1 and 4. So we can cross out the blue numbering system because you can see that the first locant that is different has a higher number. However, the green and the red, the top and the middle, these are tied. Both of the locants are identical. So in this circumstance, then we go down to look at the alphabetical relationship of the substituent names in order to break the tie. In that case, what we see is that ethyl comes before methyl in the alphabet based on the first letter of the substituent name. So what we're going to do is we're going to choose a numbering system that would put ethyl at a lower number, and that would be the red numbering system. So what we get for our name for this then is, it's a ring, so it's cyclo, 5 carbon, penta, we drop the A, there's no unsaturations or main functional group, so our ending will be ANE. We will then list the substituents, 1 ethyl, 3 methyl, so that would be the correct name. Now let's look at what happens when we have 3 or more substituents and no unsaturations or functional groups. Remember, the restriction on unsaturations and functional groups is important because those take priority, and so they will change the way that we number the molecule. So again, what we're going to have to do is look at all the different possible ways that we could number this thing, basically starting from each different substituent. So I could start here in the red one and go 1, 2, 3, 4. I could start on the bottom with the green one, go 1, 2, 3, 4. I could even start at this substituent that's in the middle. That would be our blue numbering system, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So again, I've written out the list of locants. In the red one, we have one at 1, at 3, and 4. In the green one, we have one at 1 and 2 and 4. And in the blue one, we have one at 1 and 2 and 5. Okay, so then what I did was I found the first locant that was different. In that case, you can see the 3 is different from the 2 lower ones, which have a 2. Since the 3 is higher, the 2 are lower, we would cross that out. 2 is lower than 3. But that still leaves us with these 2 tied. So then we go to the next locant that's different. And in that case, you can see that 4 would be lower than 5. So we cross out that one. And 1, 2, 4 would be our preferred numbering system, the green numbering system. In that case then, we do arrange the groups in alphabetical order. So I have a methyl group at 1 and 2, so that would be a 1,2-dimethyl, but we would alphabetize it as M. And then I have an ethyl at 4, so we'd have a 4-ethyl, which I alphabetize as E. The total name then would be ring of 6 carbons, so ring, cyclo, hexa, 6, drop the A, ANE ending because there's no unsaturations and there are no main functional group. And then we have listed in alphabetical order 4-ethyl, 1,2-dimethyl. Next, I'm going to talk to you about bicycloalkanes. In general, we'll probably be working mostly with alkanes that have 2 rings of this type, although potentially we could have ketones or alcohols or other groups in there. Bicycloalkanes come in 2 forms. Basically what we're talking about is 2 rings that are stuck together so that they share bonds. One way for them to be stuck together is to have one ring and then immediately adjacent to that another ring and have them share exactly one bond between them. So if you look, this bond in the middle is part of the 6-membered ring here, but simultaneously it's also part of the 5-membered ring. We call these fused bicyclic systems, and they're very, very common in biological molecules. Another way for rings to be put together is to have them share 2 or more bonds at the same time. We call these bridged bicyclic systems. To see the 2 rings and the bonds they share, it's probably a little bit easier to look at them like this. The upper drawing is sort of a quasi 3-dimensional drawing. It can be very helpful to build models to see how this comes together. The bottom one kind of squishes the drawing all in the plane and uses dashes or wedges to kind of show the relationship in 3 dimensions. So if we look at the bottom one, can you see we basically have a 5-membered ring here. We have another 5-membered ring on the right. And those 2 rings are sharing this wedged bond and that wedged bond. So they're sharing 2 bonds instead of just 1 bond. And so those 2 bonds kind of come over the top and they form a bridge connecting over between the 2 parts of the ring. Okay, so how do we name these things? Well, the first thing to know is that we're going to count up all of the carbons in both rings to get our parent name. So for example, this ring would have 6 carbons here plus the one on top. So that would be 7 carbons. So we would name it as a hept. This ring here has 6 carbons plus 3 more. That's 9. So we would name it as a nona. Okay. Next, what we're going to do is identify what are called bridgehead carbons. Bridgehead carbons are the carbons that are simultaneously in all of the possible rings. So in the fused bicyclic, they're pretty easy to identify because they're the carbons at the end of the bond that the 2 rings share. I have them circled here. These would be the bridgeheads. In a bridged bicyclic, it's a little harder to identify until you're accustomed to it. But basically, if we look, although we call this a bicyclic molecule, really it has 3 rings. It has a 5-membered ring here on the left, has a second 5-membered ring on the right, but then kind of underneath those 2, there's a 6-membered ring here. So really there's 3 rings. If we look then, this carbon would be in the left 5-membered ring and in the bottom ring, but not in the right-hand 5-membered ring. So this carbon here cannot be a bridgehead. In contrast, this carbon here it's in the left 5-membered ring, it's in the right-hand 5-membered ring, and it's in the bottom ring. So that carbon would be a bridgehead. This carbon would also be a bridgehead. So I've circled those. Now, the bridgeheads are then going to have bridges attached. Bridges are chains of 0 or more carbons that connect from one bridgehead to the other. When we count the carbons in the bridge, we exclude the bridgehead carbons. So let's take a look at some examples. So if we look at this molecule, the bridged bicyclic, here's a bridgehead. We go out around this chain, we have 1 carbon, 2 carbons, and then we come back to a bridgehead. So that's a 2-carbon bridge. If we go up to the top, we go up to the top, that's 1 carbon, back down to a bridgehead, so that's a 1-carbon bridge. Over here, 1 carbon, 2 carbons, so that's a 2-carbon bridge. In our fused bicyclic, the bridges are a little longer. We start here, we go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then back to a bridgehead. 4 carbon bridge. We start here, 1, 2, 3, back to a bridgehead. 3 carbon bridge. Now the interesting thing about a fused bicyclic is that while it appears to have only 2 bridges, it in fact has a third, which I've indicated here in the middle. Okay? This bond is a bridge of 0 carbons. It connects the 2 bridgeheads, but it has 0 carbons in between. So those are the 3 bridges. You can see then we can get numbers associated with the number of carbons in each bridgehead. What we're going to do then is going to take those numbers, we're going to arrange them from highest to lowest. We're going to put them in brackets and separate them by periods, and then we're going to put that in front of the alkane name. We're then going to put the prefix bicyclo in front of the numbers with brackets. So here we go. So our bridge bicyclic, we said it had 7 carbons. It was a hepta. It has no double bonds or functional groups, so we're going to put ane ending. We drop the a to do that. Then when we count our bridges, we have 2 and 2 and 1. So we take those and arrange them 2 to 2 to 1, largest to smallest, dots in between, brackets around them. Finally, we put the prefix bicyclo in front of that entire name. For the fused bicyclic, we have 4 and 3 and 0. We already said it had 9 carbons total, so it's a nona, has no double bonds, functional groups, ane ending. We arranged the numbers 4, 3, 0 from largest to smallest with dots in between, brackets, bicyclo in front. Bicyclo 430 nonane. Once you practice with this a little, you'll see it's really not that hard, but it's a little bit abstract at first. So you're going to want to give a few tries of this, and of course, if you're having problems, come to office hours and ask questions. The other thing that's interesting about bicyclic alkanes, so this is not molecules that have functional groups in them. With functional groups, the order changes. We're probably not going to work with those. Instead, we're going to work primarily with just the alkanes. For the alkanes, we have a unique numbering system for the ring system. In that numbering system, what we do is we start at a bridgehead carbon, and then we start counting around the longest bridge first until we get back to the bridgehead. Then we continue from that carbon with the next number in sequence to the next largest bridge. That should get us back to our initial bridgehead. Then from that initial bridgehead, we're going to jump up, continuing the numbers to any other atoms that are in the third bridge. So let's take a look at this. So for example, this molecule. It's a bicyclononane. We already saw that. We have a methyl group attached here. Now, in straight chains, we would therefore number this to put that at the lowest numbers possible. But with bicyclic molecules, we don't. Instead, we rigidly follow our order priority for numbering the bridges. Longest bridge first, then second bridge, then third bridge. So the methyl group in this case is on the second bridge, so it will not get number 2 or something like that. Instead, what we have to do is be a little bit clever and start on the bridgehead that's farthest away from it. So we start down here, so we can number around the longer bridge, get to 6 up here, and then go straight to 7, as opposed to having numbered in this direction where it would be number 9. So we number that first. Okay, so then naming wise, we already named the bicyclic molecule. We said it was bicyclo 430 nonane. So then we would just add the substituent name and its number, 7-methyl, in front of that. This is a sort of larger bicyclic molecule. It has multiple bridges. Again, we're going to start at a bridgehead. We're going to number around the longest the longest bridge. The longest bridge in this case has 4 atoms, and it's this one right here. So we go, starting here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We then go to the second longest bridge. 7, 8, 9. That's going to get us back to our initial carbon 1. We're then going to jump to the third bridge, 10 and 11. So again, because of where I placed the methyl group, I started counting from the bridgehead farthest away, so I could go around the longest bridge, get to 6, and then it would be at 7. That way it would be at the lowest number possible. This one then would be 7-methyl bicyclo. We would put the numbers 4, 3, then 2, and then that turns out to have 11 carbons. We haven't learned that, and you will not be held responsible for that. But the parent name for that is undeca. Un sort of being 1, deca being 10, so 1 plus 10. Undeca. And then it has A-N-E ending. We drop the A.